Hello and welcome to The Case For, a Baseball Hall of Fame podcast. I'm your host, attorney and baseball fan extraordinaire Russell Christian. On each episode of this podcast, we examine a different Major League Baseball player's career, and I will make the case for whether I believe this player does or does not deserve enshrinement in the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York. If you're someone who listens to baseball games on the radio while you work, just like Robert Duvall's character in the movie A Civil Action, then this is the podcast for you. A friendly reminder, I have never played professional baseball, I'm just a fan. I'm also an attorney, and believe me, it is way more fun to debate the pros and cons of a player's hall-worthiness than it is to contemplate the nuances of the fertile octogenarian rule. The subject of our third episode is Colorado Rockies great Todd Helton. Now, Todd is the first player that I have discussed on this podcast who is currently on the Hall of Fame ballot. As of the recording of this podcast in late 2023, the subjects of my previous two episodes, Dale Murphy and Lou Whitaker, are unfortunately not currently on the current Hall of Fame ballot, although they may be on a Veterans Committee ballot in the future. Todd Helton is currently on the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot, with voting occurring in late 2023 and an announcement expected early 2024. This is Todd's sixth year on the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot. If any of what I just said is confusing to you, then now's a good time for me to tell you that my next episode will be a discussion of the balloting process, how it works, the difference between the Baseball Writers Association of America and the Veterans Committee, and a breakdown of the candidates on this year's Veterans Committee ballot. Again, if any of that sounds confusing, just stay tuned for my next episode. In the meantime, let's return to Todd Helton. Todd is currently on the ballot and had a strong showing last year, garnering 72.2% of votes, with of course a player needing 75% to be elected to the Hall of Fame. So he's right on the edge. I think this is the year he gets in. So what does all this mean? Things are looking good for Todd, and many fans, myself included, think there's a very good chance Todd Helton will be elected to the Hall of Fame this year, but not before inquiring minds have listened to this podcast to hear the case for Todd. As you know, I make the case for each player in three parts. 1, statistics, 2, hardware, and 3, what I call the fame factor. I think it adds some fun, some mystery, and a little poetry to the whole discussion. Remember, we're discussing a human being who played a game, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. So, without further ado, let's make the case for Todd Helton. Todd Helton is originally from Knoxville, Tennessee. Like many professional athletes, he excelled in multiple sports, and in Todd's case, baseball and football. He was a high school standout in both sports, and he was so good that he actually attended the University of Tennessee, where he played baseball as well as playing quarterback on the football team. Now, I know that football stats and playing experience don't count towards a Hall of Fame discussion, but it's a fun point here to note that Todd did start 4 games at quarterback his junior year, and according to sportsreference.com, he completed 36 of 66 passes for 406 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is good enough for a quarterback rating of 107.1. Now, as far as football stats go, we're not going to get too far into football stats, but a QB rating over 100 is pretty good. So on paper, Todd was a pretty good college quarterback. Also, if you listen to my first podcast about Dale Murphy, you can probably guess I'm a big fan of UGA football. So it pains me to say this, but no discussion of Todd Helton's athletic prowess at quarterback is complete without mentioning that on September 10th, 1994, Todd Helton passed for 110 yards and a touchdown, leading the Vols to a 41-23 victory over the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, as much as it pains me to say that as a UGA fan, as the parent of a Florida State University graduate, of course, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention that the following week, Todd's vaunted Vols were blanked 31-0 by the then number 1 ranked Florida State. Go Noles. Unfortunately for Todd, in the following week's game against Mississippi State, he went down with a knee injury and had to leave the game, and was replaced at quarterback by some guy named Peyton Manning. Am I reading that correct? Just kidding. Needless to say, the rest was history, and Todd didn't get his starting quarterback position back. Now, football's loss was baseball's gain. And that spring, Todd had an outstanding season for the Tennessee Volunteers as both a hitter and a pitcher. He actually set the NCAA record for consecutive scoreless innings in a season as a pitcher at 47. Now, if you're wondering, yes, I did see this statistic on Wikipedia, but yes, I also checked and verified at the NCAA's website online, where there's a PDF of baseball records. And of course, that is where I learned that some guy named George Plender, who pitched for Vermont, actually hurled over 60 or 63, depending on which column you read on which page, consecutive scoreless innings over the course of 2 seasons in 1954 and 55. And of course, I verified that information on the University of Vermont's website, where I saw that Mr. Plender was inducted into Vermont's Hall of Fame, was actually offered a spot with the Milwaukee Braves, but had already signed to join the United States Air Force. So thank you for your service, Mr. Plender. But anyway, I digress. Todd's 1995 baseball season at Tennessee was an excellent one, and he was awarded the Dick Howser Trophy, which is actually awarded annually to the best college baseball player of the year. And if you look at the list of the recipients, there's a lot of familiar names, a lot of Major League stars like Robin Ventura, Jason Varitek, J.D. Drew, Mark Teixeira, Buster Posey, Steven Strasburg, Chris Bryant. So this is a very prestigious award, and along with a similar award, what's called the Golden Spikes Award, these are both sort of baseball's equivalent of the Heisman Trophy in college football. So again, I spent a little bit of time here in college, Todd's college stats. Just he was a very good college baseball player and won this award here as the best college baseball player of the year. So after college, Todd was drafted in the first round of the 1995 draft by the Colorado Rockies, and he would stay in the Colorado Rockies organization his entire career. He initially spent 2 years in the minors. 2 years in the minors, where in 1996 he absolutely just torched opposing pitching. So much so he was actually inducted into the Arizona Fall League Hall of Fame back in 2003. So had a very good career in the minors. Todd eventually made his major league debut on August 2nd, 1997 on the road against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He went 2 for 4 with a walk. Todd would finish that 1997 season with a very respectable .280 batting average in 35 games. But in his first full season in 1998, the training wheels came off, and man, they just stayed off for the rest of his career. In his first full season in 1998, Helton hit .315 with 25 home runs and 97 RBIs. He led all of Major League rookies in batting average, homers, RBIs, multi-hit games, 49, total bases, 281, slugging percentage, and extra base hits. He also led all National League rookies in runs, hits, and on-base percentage. That was a great season, but he ended up finishing second in the Rookie of the Year balloting to Chicago pitcher Kerry Wood. Todd didn't show any signs of slowing down in 1999. He hit .320 with 35 home runs and 113 RBIs. But it was really Todd's 2000 season that just absolutely put him on the map. Now, I realize we took a little time getting warmed up here, talking about Todd's college football playing days and baseball awards and whatnot. But if you glossed over that part, you better start paying attention now. Because Todd Helton's 2000 season was not only one of the go-to points of discussion in his Hall of Fame case, but it was just quite simply one of the most monster offensive seasons by any player in any era. I mean, it was incredible. In the year 2000, Todd led all of Major League Baseball in batting average, RBIs, doubles, total bases, extra base hits, and slugging percentage, and led the National League in hits and on-base percentage. Now, I read that list here. I'm going to read it again here with the numbers so you can really appreciate how high that was. I'll say it again. In the year 2000, Todd led all of Major League Baseball in batting average with 372 batting average, RBIs with 147, doubles with 59 doubles, total bases with 405 total bases, extra base hits with 103, a slugging percentage of 698. He led the National League in hits with 216 and on-base percentage with 463. That's a lot. Now, it's hard for you to follow along. Pull up Baseball Reference, look at it. I mean, it was an incredible year. Helton's Major League Baseball leading 103 extra base hits tied for fourth most in Major League history and second most in National League history. So just an incredible year, a monster year. One thing, there's so much to parse out from that year, but according to the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR, Todd's 59 doubles that year were the most in National League since 1936, when Joe Medwick set the league record with 64. Of course, this mark was tied recently by Freddie Freeman just this past year, 2023, with 59. I really hoped Freddie could have gotten 60 doubles. It would have been pretty cool. But for now, Todd and now Freddie have the highest double total in the National League since 1936. So that's pretty amazing. I just said before, if you want to follow along, pull up Baseball Reference. If you're at a computer, I'd really recommend you just pull up Todd's stats for the year 2000 and just read along, because they don't even seem real. I mean, these are video game stats. He finished that year, like I said, with 138 runs, 216 hits, 59 doubles, 42 home runs, 147 RBIs, 103 walks, a 372 batting average, 463 on base percentage, 698 slugging percentage, a 1.162 OPS, 405 total bases, and 103 extra base hits. Wow. I mean, now, interestingly, for the rest of Todd's career, he only ever led the league in one other category afterwards, when he led all of Major League Baseball with on-base percentage with 445 in 2005. Now I say only in air quotes, because that's not to say his statistics after the 2000 season were less than stellar. In fact, they were outstanding. If you look, Todd ultimately played 17 years, all with the Colorado Rockies. He finished with a career batting average of .316, career on-base percentage of .414, career slugging percentage of .539, and OPS of .953. He tallied 1,401 runs, 2,519 hits, 592 doubles, 369 home runs, 1,406 RBIs, 1,335 walks, and 4,292 total bases. Now, Drew Goodman, the longtime play-by-play TV announcer for the Colorado Rockies, has an excellent book called If These Walls Could Talk: Stories from the Colorado Rockies Dugout, Locker Room, and Press Box. And in his book, he mentions that as of the time of Todd Helton's retirement in 2013, Helton also held the Colorado Rockies' career records for games played, hits, doubles, home runs, RBIs, and walks. Now, we'll talk about this more in a bit when we discuss the fame factor, but there's no doubt Todd Helton is one of the, if not the greatest player in Colorado Rockies franchise history. But where do his career stats, stack up against the all-time greats? Now, as far as traditional counting stats, a knock, if you will, on Helton's numbers are that for someone who was considered a power hitter, he's a good home run hitter, his career home run and RBI totals of 369 home runs and 1,406 RBIs fall somewhat short of other players in the Hall who are known as power hitters. His 369 home runs ties him with Ralph Kiner for 82nd all-time. Now, Kiner is a Hall of Famer. If you know anything about him and his career, it's worth noting. Kiner hit those same 369 home runs in only 10 seasons. His career was cut short in 1955 due to a back injury that forced him to retire at the age of 32. Now, if you look at a list of players who retired with between 300 and 400 home runs, it's very respectable. It's an interesting list because while there are many Hall of Famers on that list, there are also a lot of power hitters who had short peaks. A lot of players who are, great candidates for an episode of this podcast, but who are not in the Hall of Fame. Players like Bobby Bonds, Don Baylor, Dave Parker, Dick Allen, Lance Berkman, Jeff Kent, Albert Bell, and of course, Dale Murphy, the star of our first episode, who hit 398 home runs. So while hitting between 300 and 400 home runs certainly puts someone in the conversation, for the Hall of Fame, it's not a lock. Again, another interesting note is if you look at the players with between 400 and 500 home runs, there's a lot of household names, very famous sluggers, but again, there are several people on this list who are not in the Hall of Fame. So hitting between 300 and 400 home runs is not a guarantee for the Hall of Fame. Even hitting between 400 and 500 home runs is not a guarantee for the Hall of Fame. If you're going to base Todd's candidacy squarely on the premise that he was a power slugger who hit a lot of home runs. Unfortunately, his 369 home runs falls somewhat short, but still very respectable. Now, one of the reasons why he falls short is that while he had a strong 7-year peak between 1998 and 2004, where he averaged 35 home runs and 118 RBIs per season, his home run totals dropped to 20 in 2005, and then he never hit more than 17 in a season for the rest of his career, and actually had 2 seasons in which he hit 7 home runs, and one season in which he hit only 8 home runs. Again, I say only air quotes. Still more home runs than I've ever hit in the major leagues. But for a power hitter, this is the indication of a clear decline, and as a result, he fell well short of the 500 home run mark, generally thought to be a benchmark for Hall of Fame home run hitters. But an interesting thing happened when Todd's power started declining. Even though his power numbers, his home run numbers started going down, his batting average still remained high. In fact, starting in 2005, when he hit 20 home runs, he had 5 more seasons where he batted over 300. And his batting average in the final declining years of his career, from 2005 to 2013, was a very good 293 with a 396 on-base percentage. So this takes us to perhaps Todd's strongest statistical case for induction, which is his career batting average of 316, which, of course, is very, very good. Helton accrued this career batting average by batting 300 or higher in 12 different seasons. Now, according to one of my other favorite websites, StatMuse, there are 27 other players who have hit 300 or better in 13 or more seasons, with, of course, all-time great Ty Cobb leading the way with 23 seasons of 300 or better, which is just insane. Now, the stats get a little more interesting when you consider that many of these players played during what's called the dead ball era, generally thought to end in 1920. But of these 23 players who hit 300 in 13 or more seasons, the only players to play the entirety, or at least the majority of their careers after 1945, the end of World War II, generally considered to be the modern era of baseball, are Tony Gwynn, Stan Musial, Ted Williams, Wade Boggs, Rod Carew, Pete Rose, Vlad Guerrero, Roberto Clemente, and Hank Aaron. And Todd Helton and Derek Jeter are tied, both have 12 seasons over 300. So I like to list off names sometimes when they're, because if you know these names, these are some of the all-time greats of the game. So similarly, if you look at players who played all or most of their careers after 1945, so excluding dead ball era guys, the only players to retire with career batting averages higher than Todd are Ted Williams, Tony Gwynn, Stan Musial, Wade Boggs, Rod Carew, Joe DiMaggio, actually played most of his career before World War II, but I'll mention him. There's some crossover. Kirby Puckett, Vlad Guerrero, and Roberto Clemente. So again, why do I list this sort of a tedious listing of names? Because if you know anything about baseball history, I'm reading off a list of the greatest players of all time. So Todd's career batting average just places him in extremely elite company. Now, if you want to have some fun, go to baseballreference.com and look at the list of career batting average leaders. It's basically a bunch of black and white photos of guys who played so long ago that they all have Civil War mustaches and they're wearing collars on their jerseys. And then there's Ted Williams and Tony Gwynn. So that's why I think it's important for this statistic, batting average, to really look at sort of the modern era. So in the modern era, Todd's in very elite company. Similarly, Todd's career on-base percentage of .414 ties him with Hall of Famer Mel Ott for 29th all-time. And again, most of the players who are on this list ahead of him, a lot of them played before the modern era, with the exception of a few familiar names: Wade Boggs, Stan Musial, Edgar Martinez, Frank Thomas, Mickey Mantle, Juan Soto, Barry Bonds, and Ted Williams. So again, the only modern players ahead of Todd on the career on-base percentage list are, inner circle, the greatest of the greats, first ballot Hall of Famers, or in Bonds' case, he's not in, but for other reasons. But still, no doubt Bonds was one of the greatest players of his generation. So it's fair to say that Todd, all I'm trying to say here is Todd's career on-base percentage, as well as his batting average, place him on an elite level. in terms of his career averages. Notably, I also want to point out his career on-base percentage is higher than current players and potential future Hall of Famers Mike Trout and Joey Votto, who I mentioned that because, if you're making the case for Joey Votto, who just as today as a recording of this podcast, I saw the Reds let him go, unfortunately. I hope he still plays. But if you're making the case for Joey Votto, almost his entire Cooperstown case is built upon his reputation as an on-base percentage machine. He led the National League in on-base percentage several times. So, here's Joey Votto's claim to fame as being an on-base percentage machine, and Todd's got a higher on-base percentage. So that I think that's a strong argument in favor of Todd's statistics getting him into Cooperstown. It's also worth mentioning that Todd's career slugging percentage of .539 is good enough to place him for 37th all-time. And again, if you look at the 36 players ahead of him, as well as some of the players after him on this list, you're looking at, a who's who of modern baseball sluggers. And it's interesting to note out, who he ranks ahead of on this list, including recent Hall of Famers Ken Griffey Jr. and Chipper Jones. So, again, this places him in elite company here. And his career OPS, which, for those of you who don't know, it's on-base percentage plus slugging percentage, it's .953, which places him at 23rd all-time. And again, if you look at the 22 players ranked ahead of him, you're looking at all-time greats. And it's also notable he ranks ahead of other recent Hall of Famers like Jeff Bagwell, Edgar Martinez, Vlad Guerrero, David Ortiz, Chipper Jones. The list goes on and on. So, his career batting average, career on-base percentage, career slugging percentage, career OPS. I just thought it was fascinating. All of these, place him at an elite level, either with or in some instances ahead of Hall of Famers. One thing I thought was interesting, his career OPS is higher than Willie Mays, which I just assumed that Willie Mays would have had a higher career OPS, because in my opinion, I think Willie Mays is probably the greatest all-around offensive player in baseball history. So anyway, it's just pretty impressive. If you look at his counting stats, even though he didn't really hit, some of the benchmarks for home runs and RBIs, he still had respectable numbers. But I think his career batting average on base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS really seals the deal statistically for putting him in Cooperstown. Now, if you're looking beyond counting stats at advanced statistics, his career WAR, or wins above replacement, is 61.8. which by WAR standards is very good, very respectable, but ranks him 115th all-time, with many players ahead of him who are not in the Hall of Fame. So we mentioned it before, I'll say it again. WAR can be a weird stat, though, and he does rank ahead of many Hall of Famers and contemporaries who may be future Hall of Famers, including Gary Sheffield. This was interesting. He ranks higher than Ichiro Suzuki in WAR, and Vlad Guerrero, too, as well as Willie Stargell and Freddie Freeman. Freddie's still playing, but I think Freddie will make it in the Hall of Fame. So anyway, all I'm saying is there's some excellent players, some of whom are Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers, rank lower than Todd in career WAR. So it's still a respectable number. I don't think if you were going to go, pick a go-to stat, his WAR doesn't really automatically get him in, but it doesn't not get him in. So very good, very respectable. So the last counting stat I want to discuss here is Todd's 592 career doubles. I admit I'm a huge fan of doubles. They are, in my opinion, an underappreciated statistic. The home run gets all the attention, but a consistent doubles hitter is dangerous too. I mentioned earlier that Todd and Freddie Freeman are the only players in the modern era with 59 doubles. And obviously, as a listener, Braves fan here, so yes, I'm a huge fan of Freddie Freeman, and I have not one, but two Freddie Freeman bobbleheads on my desk here. So I think when all said and done, Freddie and Todd will have similar careers. They're both first basemen, both guys who can hit for power and for average, both doubles machines. So I think that's a favorable comparison for both Todd and for Freddie. So anyway, Todd's 592 doubles places him 20th all-time, ahead of a laundry list of great hitters and Hall of Famers, including Robin Yount, Wade Boggs, Eddie Murray, Chipper Jones, Derek Jeter, and Tony Gwynn. I mean, the list goes on, but I mention those guys because they played around the same era, and like Todd, were known as great contact hitters who could also, hit for power. Gwynn wasn't as much of a power hitter. He had a little bit of power, but Chipper, Eddie, and Robin Yount had some power. Again, Wade, Derek and Tony more contact hitters. But I mentioned them because, just thought it was impressive that Todd had more career doubles than these guys. So as I like to do, if you look at the list of the 19 players ahead of Todd on this career double list, you've got, inner circle first ballot Hall of Famers, guys like Hank Aaron, Ty Cobb, Stan Musial, Honus Wagner, George Brett, the list goes on and on. So without belaboring the point, the fact that Todd's career double amount of 592, placed in 20th all time, I think it's a huge thing in Todd's favor. Again, you look at the 19 players ahead of Todd in this list, and interestingly enough, the only player on that list who's not in the Hall of Fame or will be or is out for other reasons is Luis Gonzalez. He's ranked number 19 on the list with 596 doubles. We might do an episode on Luis. He's a borderline candidate, but this high career doubles amount is certainly one of his strongest statistical arguments. So, but for now, we're focusing on Todd. And finally, of course, as you know, I love discussing fielding statistics. Now, I don't want to get too far into Todd's fielding statistics, other than to say he played his whole career at first base, which I think is worth mentioning because there's a bias of sorts against designated hitters. So I think it works in Todd's favor because he's not only a great hitter, but he played in the field at first base. And y'all know I love citing obscure fielding statistics. So I'll just say that Todd ranks 5th all-time for games played at first base, which I thought was pretty outstanding. He's also 13th all-time for putouts at first base. He is 3rd all-time for assists and double plays turns at first base, which is pretty incredible. He's also 8th all-time for fielding percentage at first base. So there's your obligatory fielding percentage reference for all you haters out there. Of course, no discussion of obscure fielding statistics is complete without the deep dive into advanced sabermetrics fielding statistics, which favor Todd well. He ranks 2nd all-time behind Keith Hernandez in total zone runs for first baseman and 23rd all-time for range factor. So, again, there's your obligatory obscure fielding statistics. So just to recap Todd's statistical argument, I think the case for Todd Helton's Hall candidacy suffers a bit in terms of some of the career counting numbers, and that is 2,519 hits and 369 home runs fall short of those, golden standards of 3,000 hits and 500 home runs. But when you combine those very respectable career counting stats for hits, runs, RBIs, walks, total bases, and the doubles, which are all very good, and make a respectable case for induction, especially with the doubles. When you combine those with his career batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS, which all place him in just very elite company, I think, in addition to his strong fielding statistics and respectable career WAR, I think Todd overall has a very strong case for the Hall of Fame, with his strongest argument being the career .316 batting average and the 592 doubles. Now, what did all these numbers mean for Todd during his career, and did they result in any hardware or awards? That takes us to our next topic of discussion, hardware. I like to talk about hardware here, awards. We mentioned Todd's excellent fielding statistics. I'm going to use some air quotes here, because during a 17-year career, Todd, quote-unquote, only won 3 Golden Glove awards. But to be fair, these awards can be somewhat arbitrary, and he had stiff competition during his career. From his peak years, 98 to 2005, he won it 3 times. Derek Lee won it twice, and JT Snow won it twice. And these guys were both very good fielding first basemen. So I think the fact that Todd won 3 is commendable. Todd also won 4 consecutive Silver Sluggers in his career for the years 2000 to 2003. Now, this is all the more impressive when you consider that in 2000, he beat out Mark McGwire, who batted .305 and hit 32 home runs, and of course, was still riding the wave of popularity from his record-breaking 1998 and 1999 seasons, just bashing home runs like crazy. So, Todd was also a 5-time All-Star for 5 consecutive seasons, 2000 through 2004. It's worth mentioning that in 2000, he was a reserve All-Star as the aforementioned Mark McGwire was at the apex of his career and got the starting first baseman nod. But from 2001 through 2003, he was the starting first baseman for the National League All-Star teams. And then he was a reservist again in 2004 as a starting position for the National League team that year went to rising superstar Albert Pujols. So all this is to mention that despite his career being bookended by two legendary National League first basemen for both of the St. Louis Cardinals, and Mark McGwire and Albert Pujols, who you remember won the National League Rookie of the Year in 2001 and then finished second, third in the MVP voting in 2002, 2003, 2004. So, Pujols was at his peak when Todd was an All-Star. So Todd was still winning Silver Sluggers and getting All-Star selections as a first baseman. So that just goes to show the level of respect he had from fans and the media, as a player during that period. Unfortunately, that level of respect never amounted to any single season awards for Todd. We mentioned his outstanding rookie year in 1998. He finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting to Chicago Cubs pitcher Kerry Wood. Now, to be fair, no offense to Todd, but Kerry Wood was electric that year. He went 13-6 with a 3.40 ERA and 233 strikeouts, and he led all of Major League Baseball in hits per 9 innings and strikeouts per 9 innings. And of course, anything about Kerry Wood, if you don't, in his fifth career start on April 12th, 1998, Kerry Wood tied the Major League record for strikeouts in a game with 20. If you haven't, go on YouTube. There's an abbreviated clip of him, getting all 20 of the strikeouts. It's pretty amazing. Now, that number has since been the number was first set by Roger Clemens back in the 80s, and since Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game, Randy Johnson and Max Scherzer have both had 20 strikeout games. But Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game remains to this day, according to a lot of statisticians, one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game ever pitched. So it's a mythical status. It's achieved a mythical status, especially amongst Cubs fans. So, I like to talk about the fame factor, the magic of baseball, and Kerry Wood definitely had that going for him in 1998. And in addition to his excellent stats, just really did something incredible with the 20 strikeout game. So most other seasons, Todd probably would have walked away with the Rookie of the Year, but in 1998, he had stiff competition in Kerry Wood, and Todd finished second. Now, just as I've set forth some of my reasons why I agree with Kerry Wood winning the 1998 Rookie of the Year, the next near miss on Todd's hardware list is a much more controversial topic. Now, this podcast that I'm doing here is admittedly sort of a niche topic of baseball discussions, Hall of Fame candidacy. There's an equally niche area of baseball discussion where fans like to re-examine previous year's MVP and Cy Young awards and sort of re-pick winners based off a more modern analysis of the respective players' statistics during those seasons. So if this is your jam and I'm talking your language, then you should know where I'm going with this, because the year 2000, the 2000 National League MVP award voting is perhaps the poster child for this type of sort of Monday morning quarterbacking, critical analysis. As I've mentioned before, in the year 2000, that's for all you Conan fans, Todd led all of Major League Baseball in batting average, RBIs, doubles, total bases, extra base hits, and slugging percentage. He led the National League in hits and on-base percentage. And his Major League Baseball leading 103 extra base hits were tied for fourth most in Major League history, second most in National League history, and his 59 doubles were the most in the National League since 1936. Todd's .372 batting average was also the fourth highest in National League history since 1941. I use that year because that's when Ted Williams famously batted over 400. And the only other National League players since 1941 to have a higher batting average are his teammate Larry Walker, Stan Musial, and of course Tony Gwynn, who, because he is Tony freaking Gwynn, as Greg Maddux says, hit .372 or higher twice in his career. So rest in peace, Tony. Just one of the greatest of the games. Now, despite this incredible statistic year in 2000, in which Todd also, for all you warheads out there, led all of Major League Baseball with 8.9 wins above replacement, he finished fifth. That's fifth in the MVP voting. The winner in 2000 was Jeff Kent, second baseman for the San Francisco Giants. Now, to be fair, Kent, of course, had an excellent season that year. He hit .334 with 33 home runs and 114 runs, 125 RBIs, and 196 hits, and won the award largely because he was seen as the leader of the 2000 San Francisco Giants, who finished that season first place in the National League West with best record in Major League Baseball at 97-65, although they ultimately lost to the Mets in the playoffs. Now, interestingly, there's an argument that Kent may not have even been the best player on his team that year. Second place winner for the MVP in 2000 was Kent's teammate, Barry Bonds. Now, some people could argue Barry had a better year because he had more runs, more home runs, led the league in walks, And Barry's WAR of 7.7 was higher than Jeff's WAR of 7.2. But in Kent's defense, if you compare Kent's 2000 stats straight up to Barry's, it's not so clear cut. Kent had a good year. I don't want to spend a lot of time going down the rabbit hole comparing Kent and Bond's stats other than to say it's not, a clear cut that Bonds had the greater year. Kent did have a good year. And one significant difference was that Kent played a lot more games than Barry that year and had a reputation for just getting clutch hits when his team needed them the most. So Kent got the edge that year. Sorry, Barry. I think Barry will be just fine, though. He's got 7 other MVP awards he can polish on the mantle, so he'll be all right. But enough comparing Kent to Bonds. Let's compare Kent to Todd Helton. Todd leads Kent that year in 2000 in the following statistical categories: wins above replacement, games played, at-bats, runs, hits, doubles, RBIs, walks, batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, and total bases. Wow. Now, the $64,000 question, of course, is why didn't Todd Helton win the National League MVP award in 2000 if he had such an amazing statistical season? Well, I think the answer there is twofold. First, there's a school of thought out there that the MVP award should essentially be awarded to the best player on the best team. Now, this is admittedly a bit of an antiquated mindset, and if you go down the rabbit hole of re-examining prior MVP awards, you notice this, happened more commonly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Perfect example being Yogi Berra. I love Yogi Berra, and no disrespect before you get mad at me here. If you look at his career, he won 3 different MVP awards in 1951, 54, and 55, despite not leading the league in any offensive category. Now, in those years, the Yankees won the World Series in 51, finished second in 1954, and won the AL pennant in 55. Of course, Yogi was a catcher, seen as the leader of the team offensively and defensively, and so won the MVP award. More recently, in 1988, Kirk Gibson famously won the National League MVP award despite not leading the league in any offensive category. And again, if you're in this niche discussion of re-examining MVP awards, if that's your thing, 1988 is another great year to discuss this. A lot of folks think Darryl Strawberry or even Will Clark got robbed of the MVP award in 1988. But Gibson was a clutch hitter, clubhouse leader on a Dodger team that won the division and ultimately the World Series. So my 2 cents for what it's worth, I think Gibson's teammate Oral Hershiser should have won the MVP award that year, but Oral did win the Cy Young award, so he's all good. So anyway, I digress. Other similar examples, I won't spend too much time on this other than to say there does exist a mindset, although not so much anymore, of awarding the MVP award to the so-called most valuable or leader or best player on one of the best teams. So in that case, Kent does fit that narrative nicely in 2000. But, what's another reason maybe Todd didn't win the MVP that year? Let's address the elephant in the room. We'd be fooling ourselves if we didn't address perhaps one of the reasons set forth why Todd didn't win the MVP award in 2000, and that's the Coors Field factor. Now, not only could I dedicate an entire episode to discussing the Coors Field factor, you could make an entire podcast dedicated to discussing the Coors Field factor and either, supporting or destroying this narrative. For our purposes today, I'll just say briefly that for those of you unaware, the Colorado Rockies play in Denver, Colorado, which of course is, at the base of the Rocky Mountains there, up at elevation. They played the first 2 seasons at Mile High Stadium, home of the Broncos, and aptly named, is sat at approximately 5,280 feet above sea level, which for all you math and geography nerds is of course 1 mile high. In 1995, the Rockies moved to their current home, Coors Field, which sits at 5,200 feet above sea level, just a little lower than Mile High Stadium, but still approximately a mile above sea level. So what does all this mean? Well, the common theory is that due to high elevation and the semi-arid dryness in Colorado air, they combine to create, and I'm using air quotes here, thin mountain air in which batted baseballs glide effortlessly over the outfield wall. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I don't want to dispute any science here. Certainly probably some truth to the fact that a ball travels further. It is worth noting that since Ted Williams batted .406 in 1941, there have been 13 seasons in which a player has hit .370 or higher. One of those seasons was Williams himself, hit .388 in 1957. And of course, not 1, not 2, not 3 of those seasons came courtesy of the late, great Tony Gwynn. Oh, man. Raise a glass if you got one. Moment of silence here. Gwynn was just on another level and gone too soon. So, now, of the 9 remaining seasons, 3 of them were Colorado Rockies. Andres Galarraga with .370 in 1993, Larry Walker with .379 in 1999, and Helton with .370 in 2000. So, 3 guys, in Coors Field hitting over .370. It's kind of disparate amount of Colorado Rockies players hitting over 370. Now, again, is this because of the air or because these guys were great hitters? Galarraga, the big cat, he was a good player, had some great seasons with the Expos before he came to the Rockies, and then had good year with the Braves. I think maybe more than one season. Larry Walker had good, he's a Hall of Famer. He had good years with the Expos and then great years with the Rockies. So, did they have these numbers because of Coors Field? I don't know. The debate continues, and I don't want to spend too much time here discussing the Coors Field factor, other than to say I think it's perhaps given too much credence in some baseball circles to the detriment of many Colorado Rockies players, many of whom are very good. I mentioned Larry Walker. It took him a while to get in the Hall of Fame. I think he's kind of trying to get over the stigma of the Coors Field. I think it's a little unfair. So, you still have to hit the baseball to be a good player. And there's a lot of players on the Rockies who have not had outstanding statistical seasons. The other thing is, we don't take into account a lot of other, ballpark factors. I mentioned Barry Bonds a few times. They basically created, that stadium out there with that short porch, for a left-handed slugger like, Barry Bonds. It's like a custom bespoke stadium made for Barry Bonds to crush home runs in. So, everyone likes to talk about park factors when it comes to Coors Field, but nobody likes to talk about park factors when it comes to other stadiums. So, anyway, maybe some players, who are already great get a slight edge due to the air. It's possible. But, as it relates to Todd Helton's 2000, year where he didn't get the MVP, one thing I want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, Drew Goodman's book, If These Walls Could Talk. In his book, Goodman talks about this, Coors factor and the 2000 MVP vote. And he notes that Helton's road stats that year, his batting average, on base, and slugging percentage, were all higher than Jeff Kent's road stats that year. So, in Goodman's words, quote, even away from Coors, Helton had better numbers than the dude who actually won the MVP, end quote. That's a direct quote from Goodman's book. So, while we can't go back and revote, it's fair to say there is a very strong argument to be made that Todd Helton and not Jeff Kent should have won the 2000 National League MVP award. Finally, when it comes to hardware, Todd Helton has had his number 17 retired by the Colorado Rockies. Helton and Hall of Famer Larry Walker are the only Rockies players to have their numbers retired, and Helton's the only one of the two to have played his entire career in Colorado. So this is a good segue into our last factor, the fame factor. No, I don't want to insult any Rockies fans, but objectively, I have to say that when I look back on the late 90s, early 2000s, in my memory at least, while Todd Helton was an outstanding player for all of the statistical reasons we discussed, to me, he doesn't quite stand out for that fame factor. Part of this isn't his fault. He mostly played for, a lot of bad Rockies teams. He only made the playoffs twice, most notably in 2007 when they faced the Red Sox in the World Series. Now, in Helton's defense, Helton batted .333 in that World Series. It's not his fault that the team lost or that his star didn't shine so, quite as brightly on the national stage as the winning Red Sox, who, if you remember, were still, riding a wave of popularity from their 2004 curse-breaking season, and, now had won their second World Series in 4 years. So, everybody was talking about the Red Sox, and the narrative wasn't really focusing on Todd. That's not his fault, And I also remember, I mentioned earlier, Todd's career was bookended by two very well-known St. Louis Cardinals first basemen in Mark McGwire and Albert Pujols, who really were stealing the national spotlight. Of course, speaking of McGwire, Todd's 1998 rookie season was definitely overshadowed by the greater story in baseball that year, which was McGwire and Sammy Sosa's, chase of the single-season home run record. And similarly, during Helton's peak years, 1998 through 2005, there was just a lot of other storylines running through baseball that were taking the headlines. You had the single-season home run records in 98 and then Bonds in 2001. The Red Sox curse-breaking in 2004, 2001 World Series in New York after 9/11. Remember, President Bush famously threw out the first pitch. It was a great World Series. Diamondbacks won with a big walk-off. We talked about Luis Gonzalez earlier. That was kind of his moment of fame. During this period, too, Sammy Sosa had 3 seasons hitting over 60 home runs. Ichiro took the league by storm, won the MVP in 2001, then broke the single-season hit record in 2004. I could go on, but suffice to say, there was just a lot going on in baseball during this period, where to the point where, in my opinion, outside of Colorado, Todd Helton just, wasn't getting a lot of attention in the national media. So, again, this isn't Todd's fault. And I don't want to go too far into, some of these home run records we mentioned, other than say, where I'm going with this. Some of these players have admittedly or suspectedly, maybe had a little help with these records. And And I respect a lot of these players in that area were perhaps unfairly judged because they weren't putting up similar, monster numbers as their contemporaries. You don't take my word for it. Hall of Famer Frank Thomas has discussed this in several interviews, and I recommend. He's a great source of perspective on this topic. One guy that comes to mind is Eric Karros, played for the Dodgers. He had several seasons, I think it was 3 or 4 seasons with 30 home runs and 100 RBIs, and never made a All-Star team because there was just so many other guys hitting way more home runs than him. So it was kind of a interesting time for baseball. So while the fame factor isn't quite there for Todd outside of Colorado, it's not necessarily his fault. I think it's a bit unfair to penalize him for that. Now, I use the qualifier outside of Colorado because, when discussing this fame factor, it must be pointed out that in Colorado, Todd is, of course, an absolute fan favorite. He spent his entire 17-year career with the Rockies. Again, he's the only player to spend his whole career with the Rockies and have his number retired. Now, Larry Walker is another Rockies great, but spent the first 6 years of his career with Montreal Expos. And he'd already won Gold Gloves, Silver Sluggers, received both the Rookie of the Year and MVP votes in multiple seasons as an Expo. So he was already a star when he came to Colorado, and he left Colorado, finished his career with 2 good seasons in St. Louis. Likewise, Andres Galarraga came from the Expos, and the Cardinals already had a star player, and left the Rockies to have some great seasons with several other teams, including the Braves. So. Todd is the only homegrown Rockies player who spent his whole career there, drafted number 1 overall, and retired a Rocky. I mentioned earlier the 2007 World Series team. It's the only Rockies team that has made the World Series, and Todd was a huge part of that team. Hit .320 for the season and .333 in that World Series. Todd is a huge part of Rockies lore, what is affectionately known as Rocktober. If you're unfamiliar, this was in the 2007 season. The Rockies won 21 out of 22 games to make the World Series, including a dramatic season finale, game 163. It was a tiebreaker game to beat the Padres to win the wild card. A lot of Rockies fans cite Helton as the start of all this because back on September 18, 2007, against the LA Dodgers, he hit a 2-run walk-off home run in the bottom of the 9th with 2 strikes and 2 outs. And the win kept the Rockies' wild card hopes alive, invigorated the players, the fan base. And, if you want to read more about Rocktober and Todd Helton's contributions, again, I recommend Drew Goodman's book, If These Walls Could Talk. He talks a lot about Rocktober, what it meant to Rockies fans. It's just a special memory for Rockies fans, and Helton was just a huge part of that. So, now, myself and a lot of other baseball fans have a soft spot for players who spend their entire careers with one team. It's just something that's extremely rare nowadays, and I think that counts for something. It's nice to see a team, especially a smaller market team like the Rockies, who haven't, unfortunately had a lot of playoff success, being able to celebrate a 17-year career of an outstanding player who's drafted by the team and played his whole career with the team. So I think it's great for Rockies fans to celebrate Helton. There's currently only one player in the Hall of Fame wearing a Rockies hat, and that's Larry Walker, who, as I mentioned, already spent 6 years at the Expos and finished his career with the Cardinals. More recently, the Rockies, not to rub salt in the wound, sorry, Rocky fans, you've seen another generational talent in Nolan Arenado, leave to play with the Cardinals. And so far, Charlie Blackmon has spent his whole career with the Rockies, but he's a free agent in 2024. So there's no guarantee he'll retire a Rocky. So it's fair to say that, for now, if you were going to pick a Mr. Rocky, it's definitely Todd Helton. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but, this means a lot as a fan. I mentioned Tony Gwynn a few times today. I mean, he's definitely Mr. Padre. Spent his whole career in San Diego, and that's, what he's known for. Amongst recent Hall of Famers, there's very few people that have spent their whole career with one team. Recently, famously, we got Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, Braves great Chipper Jones. Of course, Craig Biggio, Jeff Bagwell, the Astros recently got in. So I think it's important to recognize someone who spent 17 years with one team and has the support of their fan base. I think this furthers the mission of the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is to, quote, preserve the sport's history, honor excellence within the game, and make a connection between the generations of people who enjoy baseball. On that point, one fun note in Drew Goodman's book, he says that still to this day, his sons have Todd Helton posters in their room, and he talks in his book about the cross-generational love by Rockies fans for fan favorite Todd Helton. So what does all this mean? In conclusion, I think when you look at Todd Helton's career in its totality, his career stats, most notably his career batting average of .316, the slash line with the on-base percentage, OPS, slugging percentage, his 592 doubles, his career WAR of 61.8, his respectable counting statistics, his outstanding 2000 season, his various awards, and his status as a fan favorite in Colorado, where he spent his entire career with the Rockies and was just a key component of their only World Series appearance. I think for me, that makes the case that Todd Helton is indeed a Hall of Famer, and I hope that Todd is as he's on the ballot for the Baseball Writers Association of America. I hope they vote Todd in this year, and that we see him wearing that Rockies cap on a Cooperstown plaque very soon. So, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out my other episodes and follow me on Twitter at @TheCase4. Stay tuned for my next episode where I talk specifically about the voting process and the difference between the Baseball Writers ballot and the Veterans Committee ballot. I'm also going to discuss the individuals who are on that Veterans Committee ballot, and I'll talk about who I think should get in. So until that day, remember, when life gets you down, stop what you're doing and watch a baseball game.